In Matthew chapter 16, Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. Having just come from Bethsaida, this means that Jesus decided to take his disciples on a 32-plus mile round trip to Caesarea Philippi, the only recorded trip Jesus took to that region or anywhere remotely like it. Caesarea Philippi was established by Ptolemaic Greeks as a Hellenistic city, where the worship of the god Pan was centered. By the early 1st century, Caesarea Philippi was reviled by Orthodox rabbis, and it was taught that no good Jew would ever visit there. This city, which sits at the foot of Mount Hermon, butts up against a large cliff, referred to as the Rock of the Gods, in reference to the many shrines built against it. Shrines to Caesar, Pan, and another god, possibly the fertility goddess Nemesis, were all built up against this cliff. In the center of the Rock of the Gods is a huge cave from which a stream flowed. This cave was called the Gates of Hades because it was believed that Pan, like Baal, would enter and leave the underworld through places where water came out of it. In the open-air Pan shrine next to the cave mouth, there was a large niche in which a statue of Pan, a half-goat, half-human creature, stood with a large erect phallus, worshipped for its fertility properties. Surrounding him in the wall were many smaller niches, in which were statues of his attending nymphs. On the shrine in front of these niches, worshippers of Pan would congregate and partake in bizarre sexual rites, including copulating with goats, worshipped for their relationship to Pan. And so one day, Jesus took his 12 disciples, most likely all of whom were in their teens or early 20s, and said, "We're going to Caesarea Philippi," if he even told them where they were going. He asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." We don't know for sure where they were standing in the Caesarea Philippi region, but Jesus' next statement gives us an idea that they may have been standing within sight of the Rock of the Gods. Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it." Jesus begins to tell his disciples that they're going up to Jerusalem, and once there, he will be abused by the teachers of the law, killed, and then raised to life again. Peter pulls Jesus aside and starts to lecture him on his theology, telling him that this will never happen to him. Jesus cuts Peter off, calls him Satan, and tells him that he's only thinking about what people want and not what God wants. Jesus continues his short lesson, literally shouting at the top of his voice to the crowd and his disciples. Then he called the crowd to him along with the disciples and said, "If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for a man to gain the whole world, yet forfeit his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of him when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels." This begs a few questions. What crowd did he call to himself? Could it have been the Pan worshippers? Any crowd from this region would not have been religiously Jewish. Was the last statement aimed at his disciples who might have been embarrassed at the spectacle Jesus was creating? The Catholic tradition has taken Jesus' pronouncement in Matthew 16:18 to mean that Jesus was declaring that the church was to be built on the authority of Peter and the other disciples. It is true that they led the early church, so this would be a possible interpretation. The Protestant tradition has taken Jesus' declaration here to say that his church was to be built upon the confession recognizing him as the Messiah and the Son of the living God. This is a valid interpretation as well, and is a practice supported by other scriptures. Many Hebrew contextual scholars suggest a third interpretation, which may be just as, if not more, powerful as the others, based on the context. Perhaps Jesus took his disciples to the most degenerate place possible to say to them, "This is where I want you to build my church," where God is not even known.